Sonic Prime, barking up the wrong tree. It starts out with repeating the last line from Thorn where she antagonizes them for wanting food from the jungle. If it weren't for Sonic's attachment to Amy, I'd say this fight should end in 2 seconds because of how hard Sonic would slam into her from how fast he is. Sonic remembers waking up in front of a palm tree, and there's cheesy moments where Amy tells him that his birthday gift is the palm tree, and Sonic says there's already a bunch of those trees over here, and all of his friends share some good memories they have with him. This is a cringy, sentimental scene, and it rings hollow coming from people who do nothing but rightfully criticize him before this point. Sonic's stupid again by just insulting his friends for being sentimental. He is supposed to have an attitude, and it was never established originally that he would never use it against his friends. Thorn keeps smacking the ground with her hammer that's got some extra impact and shock waves because of the prism in it. Because the prism can do that now because it's got new powers as the plot demands. At least that's creativity. She plans to kill the other scavengers. She ends up trapping him, and I wonder why he won't spin dash through the cage or spin dash under the ground again. He climbs to the top of the cage and gets out. That is a little impressive because of how much effort he put into it. Why couldn't the cage have been magically summoned with a floor that he couldn't have gotten past? I get to see him get spun around hanging onto her hammer handle and fall to the ground, and he's knocked away again. He begins avoiding ground spikes that keep coming out of the ground, and eventually one of them sends him up to the scavengers, and Sonic gets to tell them he wasn't betraying them. He tries to convince them to find common ground with Thorn when he should know there's no chance of him succeeding in getting them to forgive her for trying to kill them. And all he needs to do is try to take the prism from her. But it makes sense because he's still supposed to be a good person, and a good person would rather not try to hurt someone resembling his friend, which is the only other choice, and would at least try to get the fighting to stop no matter how much he thinks it looks futile. And the show is clearly not the same continuity as the games, so there's no reason to think he can do the Sonic Tornado from Sonic Heroes, which would easily solve this problem, throwing her up in the air and making her fall down. He gets told that Thorn used to live with them, but just seeing a few fruits fall on the ground in front of her caused her to start screaming and running after them violently, when for all we know, they just started taking fruits. Who could take this seriously? It tries to be dramatic with the music, and no one's lampshading how crazy it was of her. At least the story makes a fool out of the scavengers again, but so mildly that I don't care. So awkward to watch Sonic talk to Thorn with a forced friendly attitude and then talk with his hands for way too long, and talk in a condescending sounding way by accident about how he wants these two groups to talk things out. It's a miracle Thorn doesn't just attack him and instead lets him go on for so long. Eventually, Sonic says that this is not as easy as Amy made it look. He never saw Amy do anything like this before, so he's referencing something off screen. The scavengers tried to kill Thorn anyway, and she ends up destroying their home. Boy, it sure would be unforgivable if the show never explained that she rebuilt their homes. I didn't think of that at the time though. He says they need to find a way to live together, even though he didn't demonstrate why she needs to, and she inexplicably doubts he knows anything about togetherness. The story wastes my time for a while, since he fails to convince her anyway. Yeah, they definitely could have cut a lot of filler and made these 2 episodes just 1 episode. He taunts her that he's gonna go to the Great Green, and Thorn shows some compassion for a bird for overworking it. He runs around a big tree to get to the top like it's Sonic CD's intro. Why would she even try to take a shot at him when it clearly risks hurting the tree, and she acted like she cared about the jungle earlier? She wouldn't do that. It also turns out her hammer can extend really far because of the magic prism. The hammer gets sent through the ceiling created by the leaves, and she inexplicably feels guilty not for damaging the leaves above the forest. She whines melodramatically like she ruined the green, even though she only damaged a harmlessly small amount of greenery and opened up the way to some sunlight that she should know is good for the growth of the plants. So she should be happy she did that. There's gotta be something magical about this place to keep all these plants in perfectly good condition considering how dark it is here. It is a world with a magic prism in it, so why not? All of the plants look perfectly green, they look perfectly fine. So I was pretty confused when I read TV tropes and it was like, no, she's actually upset because she realized that depriving the grass of sunlight was bad for it. How was I supposed to know that from the dialogue and the fact that the grass looks perfectly fine? Just make it brown then. Maybe the grass should have been brown if that was somehow the intent. But people there can't even agree on what the ending of the show implies. She wastes a bunch of time recapping about what her motivation was to terrorize these people, and finally acknowledges that she's a monster. And the story has her cry to try to manipulate the audience into caring about someone who could have killed these people long before this and destroyed their homes. And somehow they feel sorry for her, which comes off as the story trying to manipulate the audience into sympathizing with her, and it just makes me wonder why the writer is doing this after she's so thoroughly turned us against her. I guess it's because he's so dumb he thinks we'll sympathize with anyone who's fighting with environmentalism as a motive and cares about animals in a series with those as its themes. Even though the story did no attempt at persuading us why we should care less about people than the preservation of food supply of a tiny part of a jungle. And maybe because she's a girl, he doesn't see her as irredeemable because she's weaker than guys, so girls aren't taking it seriously. It looks like I said this out of nowhere, but I said this because Amy's had a long history of the stories portraying her with unacceptable behavior towards Sonic that occasionally got violent, but then letting her get away with it with a slap on the wrist at best, and then playing it off as a joke, instead of treat her like a villain. Even though if the genders were reversed that wouldn't happen, so it's probably because she's a girl. And this reminds me of that. The story ends up letting her get away with it with no punishment and easy redemption, when she had practically nothing sympathetic about her before. But since she only did bad things because she cared too much about the themes of the series, it looks possible that the writer's just going easy on her because of that. I had to think about it and start wondering if it was for any other reason. I wouldn't have wondered that if the writer didn't use a girl for this, and worst of all, it was Amy. She's so ashamed she tells her bird to fly away, even though it's gotten used to being fed by her and likes her. So why would it never come back to her? It sucks that the story never has anyone tell her that she should have just looked for places other than the jungle that have food, and then told the scavengers to follow her there. But then Sonic teaches Mangy how to fly successfully, which means there's one less thing unique about this version of Tails, and it's weird that nobody asks Sonic why he thinks Mangy can fly. He'd only try to fly because of brain damage or something else that's wrong with his brain, because there's no reason to think he could fly by spinning his tails. That's impossible scientifically. He never told Mangy he knew another version of him, and he wouldn't believe him if he did say that. And Nine knows how to fly, but we always assumed that the reason any version of Tails knew how to fly was because a bully threw him off a cliff or he ran off a cliff, and so he had to spin his tails in desperation and learned how to fly. So of course Nine's bullying backstory would cause him to learn how to fly. You'd think in a jungle, Mangy would have fallen out of a tree at some point and learned how to fly himself. So somehow Thorn and the others become friends, and somehow simply Sonic running fast enough has him get told by Shadow that he has to keep doing what he's already doing, without him going into Shadow's dimension. It's always such a waste of time when Shadow talks up for a few seconds because he's arbitrarily able to do that because the writer felt like making the prism energy that way, even though it really contributes nothing to the story. I think the writers think the Shadow fans get really excited at merely hearing his voice for a few seconds, and that's why this keeps happening. And when he reaches the prism, he gets sent back to New York City. I think it's new that he gets his fall slowed down to a crawl by the vine around his chest, catching him after he fell past a horizontal pole. He sees Nux going to fight some robots and talk in a way that encourages other people to do so, like in Sonic the Comic. So when it zooms in and Sonic acts worried, I'm just confused. First off, the concept of there being badniks to fight that he could kill easily is familiar territory to him, so there's no reason for him to be scared. Second, this whole place is familiar territory, so if anything, you should be a little relieved that he's in a place that's easier to navigate than an unfamiliar area. He should be grateful he's back in 9's dimension because now he'd be able to reunite with him. Someone who could benefit him with his skill with technology and no one else he's met in the Shadowverse can. Assuming he did care about him, then he would have always worried about him not being able to handle being separated from the first friend he had when for all he knows it's permanent, and would be impatient to reunite with him before he'd do something stupid because he'd be worrying about how he's taking it the whole time. So it's bad writing that it only leaves it up to assumption and instead implies that he only cared about his own goals, which would be out of character. He had Meiji, but Meiji has other friends, while 9 never did, so 9's the version of Tails who inspired the most pity in Sonic. Also, it doesn't look like there's anyone here that he's encouraging to endanger themselves fighting robots they can't damage, and Knucks would have to be impossibly stupid or sadistic to do that to people. If it isn't explained later what caused the shard to bring him back to a universe he already went to where he wouldn't get to find another shard, then it should have been. I assume the reason he was sent back here was that the shard knew he subconsciously would rather reunite with 9. Or there's another shard here. What's a lot more arbitrary is the shard sending Sonic to the jungle zone instead of a different universe that'd be just as close to this one. I'd think there would be an equal 50-50 chance of him being sent to either the universe that's one above and one below the number associated with the universe he's in. The number associated with the atomic vibrational frequency that distinguishes every universe from each other to keep them separate. This story by Patricia Villetto was about Sonic tediously running from Thorn and doing an awkward, failed attempt to try to get her to reconcile with the people she unfairly tried to kill for feeding themselves, instead of wandering around looking for some food they don't know for sure is in that direction anyway. Logically, she tried to kill every wild animal that tried to eat the fruit too. Good thing they didn't establish that, or her love of her bird wouldn't mean much. The story somehow resolved itself when Thorn uncharacteristically tries to attack Sonic in a way that would risk attacking a part of the jungle too, even though that's against the entire reason she was fighting him. She sure is hypocritical to be okay with her bird eating the fruit, because obviously it is eating it or it would have died, so she literally does value animals over people. And it's unsatisfying that she gets away with everything somehow. As usual, the story sucked because Sonic was stupid and lame the whole time, which was a little frustrating and made me wish he wasn't the main character.